Esto Se Habla. Conduce Rafael Cavada y Antonia Laborde. Una producción de Prisa Media.
Muy buenos días, bienvenidos a De Esto Se Habla, esta coproducción entre El País y Radio ADN. Hoy estamos junto a Antonia Laborde y nos acompaña David Friedman, hijo de Milton Friedman, premio Nobel de Economía, referente de los Chicago Boys. Es la segunda vez que está en Chile, lo trae el Centro de Estudios Libertarios, el mismo que invitó a Javier Milei antes de que fuera presidente, y este viernes tiene una conferencia en el Ritz-Carlton. Mr. Friedman, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. I want to start to asking about your point of view of the Chilean economy. What is your diagnosis?
The answer is that I am not an expert on the Chilean economy. It's perfectly reasonable that you should be interested in the subject, but Chile is not the country I live in. It is a pleasant country to visit. My impression from a great distance is that it is more economically successful than most of the rest of South America, but I have no idea what the current status of the economy is or what its problems are. It's not what I do. A lot of people think of economics as a study of economies, but that isn't really what it is. Economics is a way of understanding human behavior. It's a particular approach to making sense of the rest of the world, which is mostly other people. And it can be used for understand an economy, but it can be used for many other things. And the kind of economics that I've specialized in recent decades is using economics to try to make sense of legal systems, of laws. If you think of a legal system as a system of incentives, and you say not what is just, that's one interesting question. But another interesting question is, if you have these laws, what will people do? And if you have a law that's intended to make them do one thing and it actually makes them do the opposite thing, it's a bad law. And my most recent book is called Legal Systems Very Different from Ours. It starts with Imperial China, which is a legal system that goes back 2,000 years, tries to understand how it works. And it then goes on to many other legal systems, ends up with people like the Amish, who have their own legal system inside the American legal system, and the Romani, who similarly have traditionally had their own legal systems inside the legal systems of the various host countries. And I'm trying to understand them. And that's what I do, and I don't study economies, whether that of Chile. I don't even study the American economy.
Okay, but let me rephrase it. I will still talking about economy.
Yes.
Only the first part. The Chilean economy has been stuck for more than a decade, okay? And now the question is how to get out of this. But do you don't believe the governments should set economic priorities? It's something that you said in an interview before. So how I
have general views on the subject which are not specific to Chile.
The
general view is that running an economy, deciding what happens, works better if it's done by voluntary transactions among the people who are doing it than if it is done by the government. That as a general rule, if you think about let me go back a step. All societies face what economists call the coordination problem, that in order to do almost anything, you have to coordinate the activity of a large number of people. That in order for this radio program to go on, somebody has to be producing electric power for you. Somebody has to be arranging with the parking lots so that people who come here can park their cars. You end up, if you run down the chain of people who are involved in doing anything, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. There are basically two ways of doing that. One of them is to have somebody at the top giving orders, and that works for very small groups of people, but that scales very badly. That the more people you're trying to control, the further you are from what's really happening, the less your interest is the same as their interest and so forth, and you end up with monstrous systems like Stalin's Russia as a result. The other way of doing it is a decentralized mechanism in which each person controls a little bit of the problem, basically himself and what he owns, and they interact with each other by voluntary exchange. And it turns out that that method does scale. That method works for 1 billion people as well as it works for, in fact, a little better than it works for 100 people. And that if you have the appropriate rules, you can set it up so that as a general rule, when I make a decision, I bear the costs of that decision and get the benefits. And therefore, what is in my interest is also what is in our interest. And therefore, you can coordinate on a very large scale. And I think that second method works much better, and that in general involves as few decisions as possible being made by the government and as many decisions as possible coming out of the voluntary interaction of people. So that's a general rule for all societies as far as I can see. But I can't tell you what particular ways the Chilean government is getting in the way of the Chilean economy at the moment. I can tell you some of the ways in which the American government is getting in the way of the American economy. For example, we probably have tariffs on imports from Chile, which is stupid because
is it stupid?
Chile, after all, if Chile didn't exist, Americans would not have fresh fruit in the winter. That's where we get it from. I should say I would rather have come here at a different time of year so that I could take advantage of the fresh fruit too. But still, but in any case, so I can tell you about some of the ways in which our government makes things worse. Our government, for example, requires alcohol made from maize, biofuels, to be used along with gasoline. The result is that the U.S. is converting about 1/10 of the world's crop of maize into alcohol, which makes maize more expensive for poor people in Africa who live on it. The original argument for doing that was the claim that would hold down CO2 production. It eventually turned out when people did the arithmetic that it didn't, that the total amount of CO2 produced in the process of producing the maize and turning it into alcohol is as large as would be produced by the gasoline it's replacing. But we kept doing it. And why did we keep doing it? Because farmers vote. And farmers like high prices for the stuff they're selling. So that was one example of a very large, stupid thing that the U.S. government did. But they're not doing it because they're stupid, because they all know that that biofuels doesn't actually reduce climate change. They're doing it because the interests of individuals in a political system. In the political system, the person who makes a decision very rarely either bears the costs or gets the benefit. And therefore, there's no particular reason why it would be in his interest to make the decisions that are in our interests. So I can give you that. I can discuss it in terms of the basic principles of economic theory, but I can't tell you the details of this particular country. I don't live here.
In a more global point of view, we think of China. China is doing exactly the opposite. It's running the economy, but
compare China now to China 50 years ago.
Yeah.
50 years ago, China was
absolute power in the hands of the Communist Party.
And after Mao died, China swung very far towards a capitalist economy.
Yes.
It is still. It's maybe a little less capitalist than America, but it's not very different. America, after all, quite a lot of our economy is the government as well. Governments at different levels. The result was that the per capita income in China went up, I think in the next 30 years, something like 20-fold. Not 20%, 2,000%. I think that was probably the greatest increase in human welfare that has ever happened in that short a period of time, because you're talking about 1 billion people going from being dirt poor to being a little worse off than people in Chile, I would guess, at the moment. That is, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I don't think that the Chinese population is a lot poorer than Chile, and they were what India used to be. And
I understand. In the 40s, past century, a China farmer used to change a pair of shoes every 5 years. Yep. Now they are probably the most growing economy in the history of humanity. But it all comes from a rule of the government toward in the way that how the economy must go in a Keynesian way.
The change, the improvement, came because the government stopped trying to control the economy. There's a very good book on that particular transition, written by Ronald Coase, who was quite a major, originally British, but later American economist, and co-authored by a Chinese economist. Coase published the book, I think, when he was 100. Died a few years later, unfortunately. And he discusses what happened. And what happened, by his account, is that after Mao died, the Chinese elite were finally able to go abroad, to see other countries, which they hadn't done. And they believed that China had the best economic system in the world. They were socialists. And they went abroad and they discovered that China was one of the poorest countries in the world.
So they learned.
And they concluded not that socialism was wrong, but that they must not be doing socialism right, and that they were making a mistake. And they didn't know what was wrong. So what they decided was not to suppress things that happened. And the reinvention of private property in agriculture was done illegally and covertly in two very poor villages. In one of them, it was done by the peasants who didn't tell the communist officials what they were doing. In one, it was done by the lowest level of communist officials who didn't tell the people above them what they were doing. And it worked. And eventually, it became public. And the government says, well, this is still illegal, but we're not going to punish you.
Yeah, but in the system of law that you mentioned before, this is the economy must be ruled must be oriented.
No.
No?
No, the economy orients itself. It's the attempt. It's the attempt of the government to orient it that causes most of the problems.
Understand.
There will always be problems in anything human beings do, but the major problems. If you look at the history of the U.S., I know much more than the history of Chile, and the U.S. has had it's really had three major depressions. Two of them were set off by failures by the government people in charge of it, in a sense. The first was the failure of the Second Bank of the United States, which was in the 1830s. And that was a bank that was created by the government, then collapsed when the politics changed, I think. And that resulted in a several-year-long depression. And then in the early 20th century, the Federal Reserve System was set up in the U.S. supposedly to prevent bank runs, to be a lender of last resort when there was a risk of the banks going broke. When, after the stock market crashed, a little bit after that, when there started being a stock market being a run, the Fed did nothing. Well, the banks had all been set up at that point, relying on the fact that the Fed was there to protect them if there was a run, so they hadn't taken the sort of precautions that they had taken in the past against that. And a whole bunch of banks failed, and we got the Great Depression, which was... Now, obviously I'm simplifying, but my point is that insofar as the government is involved, the government has been responsible mainly for economic problems. If you think about inflation, Inflation happens basically because a government finds it in its interest to print more money. And in extreme cases, like
Argentina.
like Argentina,
yeah,
right. Argentina, it's not that the things that people could use as money, like gold or silver, they don't inflate.
Understand.
And in this picture, the economic or the government have to help the poor people, the citizens that are not in the market, like in a pole position.
But at least in the U.S. case, I think quite a lot of people who are not in the market are not in the market because the government will let them be. If you think about different governments, I really say the government, and their government is a form of institution. And in the U.S., there are federal government, a state government, a city government. But at least it was the case when I grew up in Chicago, and I think it still is, that in order to be a barber, you had to take a couple of 100 hours of classes on how to be a barber. Why was that the case? Because the Barbers Union got the regulators of the government, the local government regulators, to require that in order that there would not be more barbers to compete with them. And that's true pretty commonly. So that is one of the reasons that you have people who are poor. If you think about
the opportunities, the access of opportunities is another reason. The inequality to access to a good education or a neighborhood is another reason.
There are lots of reasons why people would not be equal if the government was not involved. All I'm saying is that the government, in some ways, reduces the situation for the poor. If you think about, again, in the U.S., I don't know about in Chile, what are the respects in which the poor people are worse off? And the answer is education. Education is K through 12 education is provided almost entirely by the government. And the government provides it both to poor people and to not poor people, but the poor people get a much lower quality. It is in police protection that the high crime areas are generally areas where poor people live. So the government is at least in large part responsible for the fact those people are worse off. Now, that's not the only thing. Obviously, I had the good luck to have very good parents, and that helped me in ways I didn't particularly to earn. And somebody who has parents who don't care about him at all is going to do much worse. And somebody who has parents who care about him but are very poor and don't know how to teach their kids to read and things is going to do worse. So there's always going to be inequality, but I don't think that government is on net a promoter of equality. When I read one of the novels written before the fall of the Soviet Union, what struck me was that the difference in that system between a doctor and the woman who cleaned his house was much larger than the difference between me and the people who we hired to clean our houses. That was a society. It used to be the case, I'm not sure if it still is, that in America you would hear stories about foreigners marrying Americans in order to migrate to the U.S. In Russia, they had the same stories in order to migrate to Moscow.
Yeah.
So that you had enormous inequality coming out of a system where the government controlled the economy. So I don't think in general that increased government control reduces inequality. Now, I'm sure it helps some poor people, those poor people whose votes the government wants at the moment, but it hurts other poor people.
Okay.
Let's talk about police, military.
Yes.
They shouldn't be run by the government. or the states?
That's an interesting question. And I think the military is the hardest problem. Mm-hmm. That if I think about how a society without the government could run, the equivalent of police you can provide privately because people want to be protected. Mm-hmm. And what I've imagined, what I sketched in my first book 50-some years ago, is a society where there are companies that sell the service of protecting your rights, and many such companies, so it's not a single monopoly government, and each pair of such companies agrees on a private court that they will use to settle disputes between their customers, so that you get a legal system that's being provided on the market, mm-hmm. as well as protection. And that is workable because protection is what we think of as a private good, that you can say, if you don't pay a company to do it, you won't get protected. That's a good reason. National defense is a public good, mm-hmm. meaning that if you produce it at all, everybody gets it. Mm-hmm. And there isn't a way of saying, you've paid your taxes for the army, so we'll protect you, but your neighbor who hasn't paid, we won't protect. We can't do that. So producing public goods on the private market is a hard problem. It's not always an impossible problem, and there are a number of...
Even in the military? I guess Janissaries, Mamelukes...
Let me give the extreme example.
Yeah.
And that's the Comanche Indians. The Comanche Indians were a stateless society.
Yes.
They didn't have a government. However, they had institutions such that warfare was profitable. And a war chief, mm-hmm. was not a political position. He was an entrepreneur who said to a bunch of other Comanches, let's go raid the Americans or the Mexicans, and we can steal horses and slaves, and it's worth doing. And while you're in my party, you obey me. If you want to leave, you can leave at any time. They were a much smaller mm-hmm. society than either the Mexicans or Americans. They were a much less advanced technological society, but they were very, very good at being soldiers.
It's an asymmetrical war,
and they prevented expansion across Texas for about a generation. Yeah. They eventually lost. But that's an extreme example of military being done privately. A second example for a moment. If you look at English history, mm-hmm. When Alfred the Great, the Saxon king, he was fighting against what they referred to as the Danes. Mm-hmm. And though the various Scandinavian... What?
Vikings, Danish people.
Yes, that's right. Scandinavians who were raiding England in order to either get land or be paid to go away or get loot.
Or raids.
And those were not national armies. Mm-hmm. Those were entrepreneurial projects. So it is possible.
Indian company in the Netherlands history. But when you made the...
But that's a harder problem. Yeah. So that my basic view is that the system I describe would probably not work for a country that had strong aggressive neighbors. That I would not suggest that Estonia abolish its army. On the other hand, Estonia is an interesting case because they've come close, they've moved in that direction in the sense that in Estonia, I think it's Estonia, not Latvia, but I confuse them too, the national sport is training for guerrilla warfare. Ooh. That they have competitions, and I'm sure it's subsidized by the government. The government probably provides them with the guns. But they are, and the basic theory they're working on, which is a good economic theory, is we can't defeat Russia in a war.
Yeah.
But we maybe can make it unprofitable for them to conquer us.
Switzerland, it's another example of that.
Well, yeah, Switzerland is a different system, though, because it's entirely run by the government.
Yeah.
In this case,
I was talking about the military theory.
If you look, well, I'm not sure the Swiss don't believe that they could actually defend themselves. But the inequality is even greater in the case of the Balkans.
Yeah.
But if you think about a general economic approach sort of to conflict, is that you don't have to make it impossible for somebody to do something. Mm-hmm. You only have to make it not in his interest to do so. I've got a very short collection of economics jokes, and they're not jokes about economics. They're jokes where the point is where they teach an economic lesson. And one of them is an economist and businessman are walking in the woods, and they come across a large and hungry bear. And the economist turns to run, and the businessman says, "You can't outrun a bear." And the economist says, "No, but I might be able to outrun you." But that's the same. It's the same point.
Yeah, I understand.
The bear doesn't want to hurt the economist. The bear wants to get dinner.
Yeah, I understand.
So that's the theory they're working on. But I agree that I don't think that a stateless society would work under all circumstances. What I'm trying to convince people of is that it is one of the viable options, that I want to move the idea of a society which does everything without government from obviously impossible to it might work, might not work, depending. We also haven't done the experiment. We know of some past societies where law enforcement was entirely private. The one I first encountered was Saga period Iceland. Iceland about 1,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. One of the places the Vikings came from.
Yeah.
And though most of them were from Norway and Denmark, but some of them were from Iceland. And that was a system where they had a single system of laws and courts, but there was no government enforcement. So it was entirely enforced through private mechanisms. And
again, small communities. Farmers.
Yes, they were farmers. We don't have an example of a large modern society run that way. Yeah. And maybe eventually Milei will give us one, but it's going to take a long time.
I want to ask her about that.
That'll take a long time. That is. If Milei
it's not possible in one government.
If Milei turns Argentina into Chile, that will be a very large accomplishment. Mm-hmm. That is, if he turns it
in 3 years.
No, he's not going to do it in 3 years, but in his career.
Okay.
In 15 years, if he makes Argentina as well off as Chile is now, with as little involvement of the government as Chile has now, there's a great deal further you could go. Chile is not my ideal society, but Chile as a whole.
Which one is your ideal society?
I don't think any that exists, but.
But how can you imagine? Like, explain. What is the goal?
The goal would be a society where all economic coordination is coming out of voluntary transactions, and where you don't have any. One of the interesting issues is how do you find a government? That I've just described armies that were not government armies, the Danes. And I think the answer is that in any society, there is a set of what people perceive as rights, where what they mean by that is they are willing to bear large costs defending them. So if you imagine that you're playing, you're out in the street with your kid, and some bad guy comes by and grabs the kid's toy. And the toy cost you $5. Mm-hmm. You're willing to bear a good deal more than $5 of cost, running after him, some risk that you'll trip and fall, he might beat you up, and so forth. So that one of the ways human societies work is that human beings have a sort of a commitment strategy, saying, here's the line where if you cross, I won't take infinite. You know, if the guy who stole the toy has a gun, I'm not going to chase him. But I'm willing to bear substantial costs, more than the amount at stake. And you see that in politics. If you think about the war between England and Argentina, the stakes in that war were of almost zero value. There was some islands with a few hundred people on them who were British citizens. But England was willing to risk its only aircraft carrier to send a fleet halfway around the world in order to fight a war, because they wanted to establish that if you grab something that's ours, we'll make it very expensive for you. Because after all, if they let it go, Spain might like out Gibraltar. And there might be some other places that, you know, there are parts of Ireland that are not in the Irish Republic. So what government is the organization against which you drop those strategies. That if the government tells me, I'm sorry, your kid's toy we've decided it's dangerous. You don't think it's dangerous, but we've decided it was dangerous, and we're going to take it away from you. I don't fight them. So I think my ideal society is a society which has no organization that has that characteristic. No organization which everybody takes for granted can violate the rights that we have against each other.
So, what are the moral restrictions?
What?
Moral restrictions?
Moral,
Philosophics,
ethic.
Morality.
Yes.
What is the morality? Drugs, guns. Should be anyone authorized to buy drugs, to use drugs, to have weapons?
If you're asking about the society I want, I think that people should be allowed to have guns. I should even be allowed to use an air rifle to shoot the squirrels that eat my apricots before they get ripe. I think people should be allowed to have drugs. The only case where I think there's a reasonable argument for restricting drugs is antibiotics, and that's because of resistance. That if I use antibiotics a lot, that may mean they don't work anymore because the disease organisms evolve.
If I use LSD and I'm a pilot, I should be authorized to use LSD?
No, the people who hire you as a pilot aren't going to let you use LSD when you're being a pilot.
So I'm talking about morality.
I was talking to my grandson, who's in the D.C. area, and he says one of his friends uses heavy machinery in the airport in Baltimore while on marijuana.
Whoa!
So in fact,
heavy machines.
That's his description. But going back, I would have said that I would not choose to fly in an airplane if the pilot used.
How could you know?
Generally, when you're flying in an airplane, it belongs to a company. Mm-hmm. That company has an incentive to inform its customers of things that they care about, or else they won't fly with it.
Let's say the pilot that particular day said, well, I want to fly my plane with LSD.
Well, as long as I'm not on the pilot of the plane, I mean, I'd rather he doesn't do it over my city.
But isn't that a risk of letting anyone use drugs?
Well, in fact, as you may have noticed, anybody can use drugs.
Yeah.
We as far as I know, there are very few pilots. I mean, you can get LSD. It's illegal, but you can certainly get it. And nonetheless, I haven't observed pilots flying it because they kill themselves as well. But at least in the U.S., I think the effect of the laws against drugs are to create a good deal of crime, to give government an excuse for a good deal of restrictions in individual freedom. That you hear these stories every once in a while where the police somewhere got the wrong address and they smashed the door of somebody's house in and set off some sound grenades and if the person in the house
corruption.
If the person in the house thought that it was an attack and shot back, they kill him. Not very often, but that occasionally happens. So I think that on the whole, and it's usually, they're not going after kidnappers. There aren't very many kidnappers. It's usually the claim that somebody is selling drugs. Mm-hmm. So no, I think that on the whole, a long time ago, I had a conversation with a doctor who apparently dealt with heroin a good deal. And according to him, the most serious side effect of heroin is constipation. And most people who are addicted to heroin go off it in their middle age, sort of 40s or something. So as far as I can tell, I wouldn't choose to use those. I don't even drink. I've drunk enough alcohol so that I could see the effect on myself once in my life.
Once? You're right.
And before you say that, Milei was the president that is more close to your beliefs, right? Do you think that Argentina is going in this direction that
I don't know.
I don't know. You haven't studied what it's going on?
Milei is constrained by what he can do without losing too many votes. So
that's the question. Is it possible that kind of rule in a democratic way? Your father used to say that in Chile, the problem was that it was not a democratic country when we made a lot of economic reforms.
Yes. On the other hand, England was a reasonably democratic country in the 19th century when it abolished its tariffs, and you had a very prosperous 19th century, basically because
they were an empire.
It's not clear whether they made or lost money from the empire. I've seen it argued both ways, that the East India Company made a lot of money for some people, but it kept going bankrupt. But my point is, I think it goes both ways, and I think that the job of libertarians is to persuade enough people to get enough ideas out so that if you think about how democracies actually work, I like to analogize a democracy to the kind of old microscope which has a fine control and a coarse control.
Yeah.
And the fine control is lobbying. The fine control is special interests who know exactly what they want and are willing to make campaign contributions accordingly. The coarse control, which determines the range of possibilities, is free information, is what all of the voters know, whether true or false. So if all of the voters know that a tariff is a way of protecting good American workers from bad Chinese workers, then it will be politically easy to pass tariffs.
Yeah.
If all Americans know that a tariff is a way of protecting steel workers from the competition of farmers, because after all, one way of getting steel is to grow grain, export it,
and buy some
and
steel.
buy steel. Then it will be more difficult politically to pass a tariff. So a lot of the job of a libertarian, or of anybody else who wants to change the political system, is changing the mix of free information, is putting ideas out at whatever level you can do it, which might be me being a novelist or doing a talk show or writing books or being a professor. There are lots of different ways of influencing the world, but with the objective of changing what are the things that everybody knows. So my favorite example of my best accomplishment is the story that I tell, which I've seen many people copy online, of how you produce cars. That we have two technologies for producing cars. One of them is that we can build them in Detroit, and the other is we can grow them in Iowa.
I understand.
And
I understand.
You obviously get the point, but for your listeners, the way you grow cars in Iowa is you grow the raw material called wheat that they're made out of. You put the wheat on a ship, you send the ship out into the Pacific Ocean, and it comes back with Hondas on it. And that's just as valid a way of producing cars as the way in Detroit.
I see the point.
And because that's a striking and easily remembered story, it spreads the understanding of a little bit of economics to people who are not studying economics. A long time ago, I wrote a price theory textbook, and I gave a copy to my favorite aunt, who never read it, I'm sure. And she passed the copy on to her son, who I'm sure never read it. And he passed it on to his daughter, who I'm sure never read it. And she passed it on to her fiancé, who read it. And I was told that he entertained the family at breakfast with bits from my price theory book. And on that story, I rewrote the book as a book teaching the same ideas, but intended to be read for fun. And my model was a book that you may or may not have read called The Selfish Gene.
The Selfish
Gene, which is a book on evolutionary biology, written by a serious evolutionary biologist, but written to be read by people for the fun of it. And that's one way of changing the world. And
Mr. Friedman, has been a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Antonia,
Thank you.
muchísimas gracias. Ha sido un placer conversar contigo.
Igualmente.
Hasta aquí esta edición de Esto Se Habla. Muchísimas gracias para todos aquellos que nos ven en redes y nada.
En nuestras plataformas, YouTube, en ADN y en elpaís.com.
Chau, chau.
Chau, chau.